This is about survival. Do you understand?
When I picked up Alien Rogue Incursion last year, I was pleasantly surprised to discover that it shared concrete, definitive links to Alien Isolation, almost functioning as a de facto spin-off to it. Johnny Dragon here. Today I'm going to do my best to try and unpack some of the connective tissue, cover the key mentions of Amanda since her exploits in Isolation, and maybe narrow the window about exactly where within the wider canon an Alien Isolation sequel is likely to land, and how some of the information we already have from other places might just inform it. So Alien Isolation was released in 2014, but in the more than a decade that's passed since then, Amanda's story has been further fleshed out and added to by subsequent entries in the series. She has appeared or been mentioned in at least 8 different pieces of Alien media since Isolation. To understand the connecting tissue between Isolation and Rogue Incursion, though, we need to actually go back to 2016. That's when Aliens Defiance, a graphic novel from Dark Horse Comics, the long-running authors of the Alien Extended Universe, was released. It was in that graphic novel that we meet Zula Hendricks and her android companion Davis 1, our main characters, in Rogue Incursion. In Defiance, Hendricks is a newly recruited Marine who gets hurt on her very first mission in 2137. An artillery shell bursts near her and she's thrown from the blast, and it breaks her back and really badly, gravely wounds her. She ends up needing a long spell of medical leave. She gets fitted with a back brace to help her walk and function, but she's never going to be back to 100% again. It's still bothering her even during the events of Alien Rogue Incursion, where she'll occasionally complain about her back. But she goes through her rehab on Tranquility Base on Luna, and it's during that time that Amanda Ripley makes her cameo in that story. She appears in a brief but key scene. While working as a systems engineer on Luna, she befriends Hendricks, who is there on rehabilitation at the same time. They part their ways when Amanda accepts a place aboard the Torrens, which is headed outbound towards Sevastopol, which of course sets in motion the events of Alien Isolation. Hendricks does eventually get to go back to active service as a specialist. She's kind of like the human liaison to a team of synthetic responders, and her team is sent on a mission to board a junked ship called the Europa as a salvage for Weyland-Yutani. The ship turns out to be part of an ongoing Wei-Yu experiment, and one of the synths on her team, who we eventually come to know as Davis, breaks his protocol and helps her to stop the ship from returning its cargo to the company. Hendricks is dishonorably discharged for that, for her actions, and even faces criminal penalties, and she also loses her United States Colonial Marines insurance premium, which quashes any chance of the operation that would permanently fix her ongoing back problems. She and Davis 1 join a like-minded independent group calling themselves the Jackals, made up of disaffected military, scientists and journalists. These guys see themselves as defenders of ordinary citizens at a time when neither corporations or governments have much inherent good intentions. They are dedicated to opposing and exposing the corporate machinations of Wei-Yu, Gemini and all the other conglomerates who use the frontier at the edge of colonized space as a free-fire zone for all kinds of deadly experimentation and exploitation.
Got to re-establish long-range communication.
Aliens Resistance comes next in the timeline. It holds a unique place in the franchise in that it serves as a sequel to both Aliens Defiance and Alien Isolation. Hendricks and Ripley are reunited post both of their entanglements with aliens, and the story tells of their attempt to expose a weapons test that Weyland-Yutani is performing with the xenomorph. Some very important relevant info comes to light in Aliens Resistance. For starters, it reveals that Amanda floated in space for 3 days after the events of Isolation. Her story of what happened is discredited, similarly to how her mother's story was discredited after Alien. Zula tracks her down on Earth, where she's back living, and Amanda is like on a hike across the countryside when Zula finds her, catches up to her, and asks her to join this jackal group, which Amanda agrees to do since Whale and Yutani have basically ruined her life by that point. So by the time Rogue Incursion begins in 2140, this is 3 years after the events on Sevastopol. Zula and Ripley are well acquainted by that point. They already know each other. Hendricks even uses Amanda's revolver in Rogue. You can actually pull it out and read its description, and it says right there that it's one of the last remnants of the Sevastopol station. Davis tries to send an SOS signal to Ripley in the game, but it doesn't get through. The facility in Rogue is on a desolate world named Perdan, a world where violent electrical storms and walls of flying dust are norms, and darkness is almost a permanent state of affairs. It's owned and operated by Gemini Exoplanet Solutions, and if that name rings a bell, it's because that company is featured in Alien Isolation. They were a subsidiary of Seegson, and they had a base of operations aboard Sevastopol. In fact, it's their detachable module in which the final face-off with the foster alien takes place. Old Stumpy Chops. To my knowledge, the narrative of Rogue Incursion makes no mention thus far of how those aliens came to be there or how Gemini got a hold of them, but there is a Rogue Incursion Part 2 coming out that I think can take care of that. Here's where it gets a bit complicated timeline-wise, because now we're going to jump into the future. We're going to go past Ellen Ripley's sacrifice on Fury 161 with the novel Alien into Charybdis, which is set after Alien 3 in the year 2184. Like, it kind of delves into the growing geopolitical tensions that arise within the Middle Heavens. The Middle Heavens is like the name of the entire region. As like, you know, the Tree World Government and the United Americas, I think it is, they kind of come into conflict. And there's also the Union of Progressive Peoples, the UPP. Like, they all have territories. Basically, humanity, when it reached for the stars, split into three. And now these three entities are competing for all sorts of resources. And against that backdrop, the possibility of a new biological weapon coming into play is kind of where that story goes. I'm still reading Alien into Charybdis. I've not finished it, but I can say without question that the events in that story are going to spark the events of the next book in the series, which is Alien Colony War, which was released in 2022. It's 2 years after Charybdis. In this one, we're introduced to a Whale and Yutani scientist whose name is Chad McLaren. He's a highly talented bioengineer, hired out of college by Whale and Yutani. His brilliance seen him excel and get entrusted with increasingly more clandestine and black book type projects. But once he's exposed to their alarming lack of scruples, he finds that there's lines that he can't cross. So he turns against them, he turns whistleblower, and he joins this jackal group, begins to channel his energy into trying to expose them rather than helping them. Davis 1, the droid from Rogue Incursion, is also in that story. And there's also a very small but very crucial confirmation that this Chad McLaren is actually Amanda Ripley's husband. If you recall in the deleted scene in Aliens where she's mentioned, her full married name is given as Amanda Ripley McLaren. So that's, you know, good confirmation that Burke was lying to Ellen about Amanda being dead by that point. Alien Colony War kind of delves into the first uses by humans of xenomorphs deployed as weapons of mass destruction, like by one colony wielded against another. But it does, I think, reveal that Amanda was not dead as Ellen was told by Burke. And I think she's in some kind of medically induced cryosleep and she's awaiting a cure, so she is ill, but I just don't think that she's passed. The Alien Isolation sequel could take place in the gap right after the first game ends, when we find her floating in space. Like, that would allow Creative Assembly to forge their own path. Like, there's plenty of gaps in the 3 years between Isolation and Rogue for them to tell their own unique story that doesn't really rely on any wider canon. But Isolation was revered, I think, for the job it did in managing to stay within the lines of what was canon and doing a really good job with it. So like it could also end up being a case that we take an owl trip into cryosleep and step into the events of, you know, maybe Alien Colony War in 2186, after Alien 3 and after Ellen. It's not unheard of, like in a gaming sense, to drop a protagonist into a story and a universe that has significantly moved on without them between entries. I mean, that's basically how Gordon Freeman gets his start in Half-Life 2. You know, the world has vastly moved on and changed from where we left him in Half-Life 1. But it doesn't matter because we pick up the story with him, as him. I think Isolation could do something similar. Putting us at the ground zero of an outbreak could be a terrifying experience. There's lots of rich horror ground to explore there. It could also be interesting story territory to bring Chad, her husband, into the fold and see how that plays out. But the run of stories that featured Zula, Hendricks and Amanda Ripley's adventures together, like it was published those years 2014 to 2019, it did eventually get cancelled due to a personal scandal involving the lead writer. It's not something that I'm going to go into in the video, but it's also around this time that Disney's buyout of Fox was completed, and Dark Horse Comics lost the comic creative rights to Marvel then. Marvel since then seemed to kind of be going their own way, not really continuing with any of the arcs introduced by Dark Horse. But Rogue Incursion released post-merger, which basically makes Zula, Hendricks and Davis 1 survivors of the Dark Horse days. So it seems to suggest that there's some elements that remain in place, or there's leeway for crossover to happen. Look, all of this really at the end of the day is just hot air and speculation. Like, it's all contingent on the notion that Amanda even comes back at all. I mean, there's no confirmation that she is. I hope she does. Like, Isolation was so bound to her, and like her search for her mother, like it made it such a personal experience, and added such a layer to it that, I don't know, doing a sequel to it without her, it doesn't really sit right to me. You know, to not have her in it in some meaningful way or even mention her, I think would be criminal. Like, it'd be nice if Servios, the developers of Rogue Incursion, and Creative Assembly were to touch base, you know, and maybe make sure, in a lore sense, they're not treading on each other's toes. Like when Fede Alvarez was working on Alien Romulus, he attempted to reach out to Noah Hawley on the Alien Earth crew just to make sure things would make sense and no wires got crossed, and Hawley neglected to take up Alvarez's offer, and that really pissed me off. Like, I took that as a lack of care for attention to detail. And like, you know, sidebar, despite a few standout moments, I really disliked Alien Earth by the time that first season was over. I thought it was a shocking waste of potential with just too many unlikable people. But, you know, my personal idea about what I'd like to see, I think I've mentioned this in my previous video, was like something that's kind of Alien 3 inspired. And like by that, I don't necessarily mean Fury 161 or a direct narrative link to Alien 3, but like rather like another one of those prison complexes that Weyland-Yutani runs. There's bound to be more than one. And like, I think that it could provide a very dramatic setting, very moody setting, and also one that really fits into what you expect to see in an Alien game. Like, Aliens is one of the greatest sequels of all time. No one can dispute that. No one should. But Alien 3 brought such a unique tone, and it went down like what at the time was considered like a really strange road for a franchise. You know, back to one Alien, the dreary prison, the sort of heavy, melancholy atmosphere that seemed to cover it all. You know, it's all very bleak and very hopeless, but then you do find the grain of hope in all that, you know. The beauty, which is, you know, the prisoners coming together to stop this threat, and they don't know any of the people who are going to be saved by this. You know, they're forgotten scum on the edge of the universe. But look, that's just my 2 cents, my bullshit and my thoughts. You know, I think there's some ideas there about the holes in the lore where the game could take place, but you know, none of that is anything close to what I would say confirmed. I suppose anything like a screenshot of the setting or any kind of snippet is going to be solid gold for the next while, because it'll all, you know, really slowly start to paint the picture, should I say, of what we can expect and what we're up against.
My chest.
So anyway, I enjoyed making this one. This one was just for me to talk some shit and express some excitement for an upcoming game. So thanks for watching if you made it this far.